What you are about to hear is an allegedly true story sent to me by one Matilda J. It is a story she called, "This is what happens when you wear headphones in the woods." Whether it is actually true or not is up to you. Sit back, relax, and listen to this chilling experience. And maybe, just maybe, rethink how prepared you are for your next camping trip. Call me weird or accuse me of defeating the purpose, but whenever I go hiking or camping, I bring a pair of Sony headphones and my smartphone to watch my favorite YouTube channels, and maybe some Netflix or Hulu. Sure, I've nearly walked into a tree a few times, but when you work 12 hours a day, 4 days a week, it can be difficult to find all the time you need to catch up on the videos you enjoy, while also finishing errands and getting outside. The thing is, though, I haven't gone outside wearing headphones for the past year now, and I don't think I ever will again, because something happened to me that was so traumatizing, I nearly never went back in the woods at all. It was July 7th of 2017. I had planned to camp out that day as I had Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays off. It was supposed to be simple and fun. Leave Friday evening, enjoy a Saturday in the woods alone, and come home Sunday so I could get enough sleep for another 12-hour shift on Monday. By 4:30 p.m. that day, I had everything packed, and all my errands had been run for the weekend. It was time to get outdoors and catch up on an overflowing subscription feed near a crackling campfire. Up in those mountains, things are always quiet. I live very close to a highway in the city, so you can imagine how much of a respite it is for me to relax in a place where you can actually hear your ears ringing. I hiked for half an hour before reaching my pre-planned campground, a small clearing surrounded by tall conifers. There was shade and plenty of moist leaves on the ground, and to me that was perfection. I began to pull the bag off of my back and unroll the tent. As I was setting up my nylon shelter, I suddenly froze. I felt something, a strange sensation on the back of my neck. It felt like breathing. Counting down in my head, 3, 2, 1. I then turned around. All I saw around me was forest, empty, silent forest. I sighed and rubbed the newly formed goosebumps on the back of my neck. I then turned back toward the unfinished tent. That was weird, was all I had to say about it. The sun was setting by the time the fire was going. It crackled in front of me, my back to the trees and the tent on the opposite side. I had a single headphone over my head, the other hanging toward the back of my scalp. I was finally able to relax and enjoy myself. I pulled up my subscription feed on the YouTube app, then I kicked off my nighttime bug repellent-fueled binge. First up was Dude Perfect. I can't remember the precise video it was, but I do remember just letting it play for a while. I was soon distracted from my sub-feed and ended up watching overdramatic bottle flip videos. That's YouTube for you. But that peace didn't last long. I must have been watching videos for about 40 minutes when I found myself petrified, motionless, frozen to my sitting position. I was supposed to be alone in these woods. I hadn't invited anyone out here, nor had I told anyone that I was going camping this weekend. So, when I felt it, I felt like my heart was going to evaporate. There were hands creeping over my shoulders. I remember thinking in my panic, who and why? I remember thinking how much I regretted pointing my back toward the woods. Whoever these hands belonged to, they were icy cold. Every centimeter of their dry, cracked flesh stung like tiny angry waves of red ants. Somehow, I could not move, or I just simply refused to move. In the back of my mind, I knew that jumping or turning around all of a sudden would force my attacker into view. And at that moment, I did not want to see who or what those hands belonged to. They creeped over my shoulders until they were coming down toward my chest. By then, I could see pale white skin and yellow chipped fingernails. They scraped over the outside of my plaid shirt. Nothing had ever felt so gentle, yet so treacherous at the same time. Its movement along my shivering body left a trail of goose flesh. Seconds later, there was a new sensation on the back of my neck, a sensation that was terrifyingly similar to breathing, except these breaths were cold and dry. What must have been 20 seconds spanned eons. Every palpitation of my heart felt like a battering ram against my trembling ribcage. What was I supposed to do? What would a person do in that situation when they missed the opportunity to jump away? When they allowed themselves to be encompassed by an unseen entity in the middle of miles upon miles of wilderness? Shaking violently now, I began to flex my arms. I lifted them slowly. My target, the headphones on my head. I will remove them, I thought, and then ask my invader what they wanted from me. My heart pounded somehow harder now. Only a few more inches, and then my hands would meet my headphones. The sound of the video playing on my smartphone had now been drowned out by the red noise of blood rushing through my veins. My hands finally met my headphones. I reminded myself I just had to yank them off. Another countdown. 3, 2, 1. I tugged the plastic arch from my head and jumped over the campfire in one spry motion. Turning toward my previous resting place, I breathed in hard. Where I was once sitting only remained struggling shadows lapping at the light of the flickering campfire, and beyond that, trees swayed only just barely in the light wind. What? I breathed out loud. Was it a dream? My mind raced to capture an excuse, but I could find none. After the denial, I found anger as I berated myself. Wearing headphones in the woods, assuming I was completely safe. If I hadn't been deafened by these headphones, I would have at least heard the assailant enter my camp. But what assailant? Whoever they were gone now, leaving me flustered and considering the idea of just abandoning my weekend plans. I crawled into my tent and sat facing the small opening, the fire still brightly alive in front of me. I stayed awake and aware for the next 2 hours. It took me that long to convince myself that what I just experienced was just a hallucination or something. Yeah, just a hallucination, brought on by exhaustion from the long work week and treacherous hike, and aided by me wearing headphones to listen to miscellaneous tripe on the internet. Having thoroughly persuaded myself that there was nothing to worry about, I laid back, still facing the opening of the tent, where the fire could be seen outside. Then I went back to taking in my sub-feed. Shane Dawson began to pour in through my headphones. I was warm, comfortable, and entertained. It was only a matter of minutes before I fell asleep. I don't know what woke me up. My right hand was still propping up my smartphone, which by then had strayed quite far from my subscription feed again. I must have been out for an hour or so. It was still dark out. Actually, it was darker now, as the flames of the fire that once imbued my tent with warmth and a secure glow had died down to not more than orange radiating embers. It gave off some light though, enough light for me to see that I was not alone. I held my breath. The sound of me breathing in would surely give me away. That is, if they didn't already know I was there. Sitting on the opposite side of the campfire was a small, feminine figure. She seemed to shake a bit every few seconds. Because of her dirty, mud-covered hair hanging in front of her face, I could not make out much more than her kneeling, quivering shape. She wasn't wearing clothes, from what I could tell, but the mud on her body had long since dried, forming a body paint-like covering about her. She could have been looking at me, and I wouldn't have been able to tell. Realizing that my headphones were still on, I quietly removed them and realized that it wasn't as silent as it appeared. Every time the girl shook, she moaned a raspy cry. She had been sobbing this whole time. This dirty, strange little girl was in my camp sobbing in the middle of the forest. My fear subsided for a moment. Human instinct kicked in as I wondered if this poor girl needed help. Perhaps she was the source of my fears from before, and my sudden jump had scared her back into the woods. Driven by guilt and anxiety, I pulled myself up, placing my smartphone and headphones beside me. But when my shoulder rubbed against the side of the tent, her face immediately cocked up. She was looking straight at me. Her face shone clearly in the ember's glow. I screamed. The girl had only eyes. No mouth, no nose, just eyes that poured tears over her far too smooth face. I was crawling backward now, hitting the back wall of the tent. I ended up tearing a hole through it to get away desperately from her. Clumsily, I got myself stuck in the hole, and I struggled for a bit before standing outside the remnants of the shelter. I turned toward the girl, but she was gone now. She had disappeared, yet her cries remained in the air. They echoed distantly through the trees around me. The sobbing now sounded as if it were miles away. There was no possible way I could make sense of this situation, and all my mind could compel me to do was flee, escape. So I gave in. I made it back to my car without any further incidents, without any further life-shattering sounds or sights. Relief was the only sensation left in me. Everything was numb now. I just wanted to go home. After this experience, I'd need a whole new weekend, just to escape this failure of a weekend. As I climbed into my car and put the keys into the ignition, I looked up. No, I didn't see the girl again, nor did I hear her anymore. But that was when I did realize something. I'd forgotten my phone and headphones in my rush. The ruins of my tent were there too, an epitome of my experience. I floored the gas pedal and didn't let up until I made it home. I haven't planned any further trips into the woods, and the most I've done is hike on already busy hiking trails, and one thing I no longer do is wear headphones outside. Call it a nonsensical phobia, but I think it's more than that. Take this as a warning. If you ever find yourself in the woods listening to something in your headphones, be careful. You're never quite alone. And if you ever stumble upon a quickly abandoned campsite with an old pair of Sony headphones lying there, turn around and leave. Leave before you hear her crying.